The moment my tires crunched against the gravel of my grandfather's old driveway, I knew something was wrong. The house looked the same white porch railings, same crooked mailbox, but the silence felt staged. And then, from across the yard, came a voice sharp enough to slice through the morning air. "You're trespassing. I'm having you arrested on sight." That's how my homecoming began. Not with a welcome, not with nostalgia, but with a scream. A woman in a navy blazer stood in my driveway like she owned the place. Blonde hair pulled tight, pearl earrings catching the sunlight. She looked like someone who'd never had to raise her voice in her life. Yet here she was, red-faced and shaking, shouting at me as if I'd broken into my own house. "I don't know who you are, ma'am," I said carefully, stepping out of my truck, "but this is my property." Her answer came fast. "Jake Mitchell, you abandoned this land, you left it for dead, and it's mine now." She waved a stack of papers like they were holy scripture, and behind her a black SUV idled with blue lights flashing faintly on the dash. A man in what looked like a police uniform stood next to it, hand on his belt. My chest tightened. Arrested for coming home. I'd just returned from Alaska, a year-long assignment rebuilding bridges on the Denali Highway. I'd been gone exactly 12 months, almost to the day. And yet somehow, this woman knew my name, my history, and apparently thought she could erase my deed with a few photocopied documents. Her name, I'd later learn, was Karen Prescott, the self-appointed president of something she called the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. Only one problem: my grandfather's property was never part of any HOA. She pointed at the SUV again, lips curling. "Officer Davis, arrest this man for trespassing and illegal occupation." The so-called officer shifted, clearly waiting for my reaction. But I'd seen real law enforcement. This guy wasn't it. His uniform looked like it came out of a costume catalog, the patches misaligned, the badge crooked. Something in his stance screamed imposter. I kept my voice steady. "Ma'am, I suggest you step back. You're making a serious mistake." She smiled like a shark that smelled blood. "No, Mr. Mitchell, the mistake was leaving. You forfeited your rights." Behind her, the morning sun hit the lawn, and I noticed details I hadn't seen at first. New street signs with gold lettering, matching mailboxes, fresh stone borders that curved unnaturally. The entire road had been redesigned, every house stamped with the same manicured uniformity. It wasn't my neighborhood anymore, it was hers. For a second, I thought of my grandfather, Robert Mitchell. How he'd built this home by hand, how he'd poured concrete posts with his own shovel, marking the corners of his land. He used to say, "Jake, land's only worth something if you understand who paid for it and why." Now someone was claiming it wasn't mine at all. I looked back at the SUV. The fake cop took a cautious step forward, his thumb grazing the holster of a gun that probably wasn't loaded. "Sir, comply with Ms. Prescott's instructions." His voice trembled just slightly, the way someone's does when they're bluffing. That was my confirmation. None of this was official. It was theater. I opened my phone and dialed the county's non-emergency number, speaker on. "Yes, this is Jake Mitchell," I said clearly. "I'm at my home address, and a woman is claiming authority over private property she doesn't own. She's accompanied by someone impersonating an officer." The color drained from Karen's face as she realized I wasn't playing her game. "You're making this worse for yourself," she hissed. "Or maybe," I said, "I'm just shining some daylight on whatever this is." The operator on the other end confirmed a unit was on the way. I could almost feel the shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The fake officer stepped back toward his SUV, Karen's voice rising again, desperate now instead of commanding. "You think you can just walk in here after a year and act like nothing's changed? This community has rules." "Funny," I said quietly, "because according to the county recorder, this land was never under your community's control." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked unsure. And standing there, in the same driveway where my grandfather once waved me off to college, I realized something simple and chilling. The woman screaming about trespassing was protecting a neighborhood. She was protecting a lie. The blue and red reflections from that fake SUV danced against my porch columns, like my grandfather's house was caught in some bad police drama. My gut told me this wasn't just about a nosy neighbor or a paperwork mix-up. This was a setup, the kind that only works if the target panics. But panic was the one thing Alaska had burned out of me. I leaned against my truck door and waited. The gravel crunched under my boots, the smell of dust and oil mixed with the faint scent of lilacs drifting from Mrs. Walker's yard next door. I could feel her eyes behind the curtain. Everyone in the neighborhood was watching, the way people do when they're scared but pretending not to be. Karen started packing, her heels clicking against the driveway like a metronome for madness. "You think you're clever," she said, waving that folder again. "I've got the authority of the board behind me." I let her words hang. "Board?" I asked. "You mean the HOA board that doesn't legally exist?" Her face twitched, just a fraction, but enough to tell me she hadn't expected me to know that. The silence between us stretched until it cracked under the sound of tires on asphalt. A real patrol car rolled up. Not black, not pretending, marked clean with an actual badge on the door. The difference between the fake and the real thing was night and day. Officer Ramirez stepped out, hand on her belt, scanning the scene. She looked from me to Karen to the fake cop still standing stiff by the SUV. "What's going on here?" Ramirez asked, her tone neutral but edged with the experience of someone who's already guessing the answer. Karen jumped in first, her voice syrupy sweet now. "Officer, thank you for coming. This man is trespassing on community property. I'm the HOA president." Ramirez's brow furrowed. "HOA president? For Maple Creek? Ma'am, I don't have any record of an incorporated HOA here." It was like watching a balloon deflate in slow motion. Karen's smile faltered. She reached for her papers again, but this time her hands shook. I spoke carefully. "Officer, I'm the legal owner of this property. I just got back from an out-of-state work assignment. My deed is registered, current, and unrestricted. These two showed up claiming they could arrest me." Ramirez turned to the fake officer. "Badge number." He froze, 3427. She nodded slowly. "Which department?" "County police." "There is no county police in this state," Ramirez said flatly. "Put your hands where I can see them." Karen's mouth opened in protest, but Ramirez didn't need to hear it. She called for backup with the casual calm of someone ordering coffee. I just stood there, feeling the dry breeze tug at the hem of my jacket, trying to process how far this had gone in just 15 minutes. When Ramirez separated us, Karen's voice finally cracked. "You're making a huge mistake. He left this property abandoned," the board voted. "There is no board, ma'am," Ramirez cut in. "And until you produce legal documents, this conversation is over." The fake officer was escorted to the curb while Ramirez verified my ID and property documents on her tablet. She nodded once, satisfied. "You're good, Mr. Mitchell. I'll be filing a report on this incident. My advice? Lock your gates and get a camera system up if you don't already have one." As she drove away with the imposter in tow, Karen stayed rooted in the driveway, staring at the dirt like it had betrayed her. The SUV lights faded, but the tension stayed behind, thick as humidity. Finally, she said it quiet, like a promise instead of a threat. "You think this is over. You don't understand how things work here now." She turned and walked away, heels sinking slightly into the soft earth along the edge of my grandfather's flower bed. The wind carried her perfume, sharp, synthetic, over the smell of dust and gasoline. When she disappeared around the corner, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour. The neighborhood was silent again, too silent, like everyone was waiting to see who'd won. But this wasn't a victory. Not yet. I picked up one of her dropped papers from the gravel, a copy of something called Resolution 247B. The letterhead looked official enough until I noticed the logo, Maple Creek Community Authority. Not county, not registered, just invented. And that's when the realization hit me hard. Karen hadn't just been trying to bully me. She built an entire fantasy government out of thin air, complete with fake officers, fake ordinances, and apparently fake neighbors who thought it was real. As I stood there, reading the nonsense about occupancy violations and community jurisdiction, one thought kept repeating in my head like the hum of distant machinery. If she went this far to scare me off, what had she already done to everyone else? The sun dipped lower behind the trees, bleeding gold through the leaves as I stood alone in the yard. The silence after the chaos felt heavier than the shouting had. For the first time since I'd arrived, I could really see what my grandfather's house had become, a stage for someone else's performance. The porch lights flickered from disuse. Dust clung to the window frames. A bird's nest sat crooked in the eaves where he used to hang wind chimes. But there was something else, something colder. The feeling that every eye on the street was still watching me. A screen door creaked. Across the road, Mrs. Walker stepped out, her robe wrapped tight and her arms crossed. She was the kind of neighbor you could measure a town by: gray hair, sharp eyes, voice like she'd been raised on decency and sweet tea. "I told her this was a bad idea," she said quietly, walking across the street. "But she doesn't listen to anyone." "Karen," I asked. She nodded, her gaze flicking toward the corner where the black SUV had been parked earlier. "That woman's been playing queen of the block ever since you left. Started with the mailboxes, then the landscaping, then community standards. Next thing we knew, she was collecting fees. Nobody wanted trouble, so most just paid." I rubbed the back of my neck. "You mean she's been charging people?" 300 here, 500 there, always cash. She said it was for road maintenance or snow removal." Mrs. Walker's eyes hardened. "There hasn't been a flake of snow in 3 years." I didn't know whether to laugh or curse. The quiet street that used to smell like cut grass and grill smoke now carried something sour: fear. The kind people learn to live with when they think fighting back will only make it worse. "She's not done with you," Mrs. Walker said softly. "People like her never stop until someone forces them to." That night I sat on the back porch where my grandfather used to drink his evening coffee and stare out at the horizon. The wood beneath my boots creaked the same way it always had, but the air felt different now, charged. A single porch light buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows across the railing. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and for a split second it sounded like warning. I pulled out my phone and opened the county recorder's site. Every document from 1987 to now was there in black and white, clean title, no HOA covenants, no restrictions. My grandfather's handwriting was still scanned on the deed: Robert L. Mitchell. And yet this woman had stood in my driveway claiming she owned it. The thought of her confidence, the way she'd waved that folder, the smug certainty in her tone, it all pointed to one thing: she'd done this before. Maybe not to me, but to others. I decided to start small. The next morning I walked the neighborhood. Every lawn looked eerily perfect. Same grass height, same matching garden lights. Even the porch signs, "Welcome to Maple Creek," looked identical. It was too organized to be natural. When I reached the end of the cul-de-sac, I saw Mr. Henderson, an older man I remembered from when I was a kid. He was kneeling by his mailbox, wiping it down with a rag even though it was spotless. "Morning," I said, and his shoulders tensed. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't be talking to me, Jake." I frowned. "Why not?" "She told us not to get involved." He paused, his voice dropping. "Karen said you'd cause trouble, said you were suing the neighborhood." "I just got back 2 days ago," I said, stunned. "I haven't filed anything." He finally looked up, eyes tired and glassy. "She told us if we didn't cooperate, we'd lose our homes, that she had county authority." He hesitated, then lowered his voice even further. "I paid her, twice, just to keep her off my back." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't neighborhood politics. It was extortion dressed as community service. By noon, I'd talked to 3 more residents. All different stories, same pattern: threats, fake citations, fines with no receipts. Every single one of them mentioned the same phrase: Resolution 247B. It was her playbook, and now it was my roadmap. That night, I sat in my truck with a notepad sketching timelines like I used to on construction sites. Each house she'd targeted, each date mentioned, each fabricated violation. Patterns emerged like cracks in a foundation, methodical, intentional. She hadn't stumbled into power, she built it. But the thing about people who build empires on lies, they always forget to reinforce the truth underneath. I stared at the porch light flickering above my door and made a quiet promise to my grandfather's ghost. I won't let her take this place. Not from me, not from anyone. By the third morning, I'd started waking up before dawn. Maybe it was the habit I'd brought home from Alaska, those long months where daylight never lasted and silence could mean danger. Or maybe it was just the unease sitting under my skin. Every creak of the porch boards felt louder, every shadow across the yard sharper. I poured myself black coffee and sat by the kitchen window watching the mist lift off the grass. For a few minutes, everything almost felt normal, until I heard a car door slam. When I stepped outside, a white sedan with county decals was parked at the curb. A man in a khaki uniform was walking up my path, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he said politely, though his tone carried the stiffness of someone who didn't want to be there. "I'm Inspector Williams with County Code Enforcement. We've received multiple complaints about your property." I blinked. "Complaints? I've been back 4 days." He nodded, flipping through his clipboard. "That's what makes this interesting. 7 separate reports filed this week, unmaintained landscaping, structural hazards, even noise violations." I almost laughed. Noise I haven't even mowed yet. Williams gave me a look that said he knew exactly what was happening, but had to follow protocol anyway. "Mind if I take a quick look around?" "Go ahead," I said. "You'll find the grass shorter than the lies." He did his walk, tape measure, notes, photos. The man worked by the book, inspecting the deck posts, the fence line, even the garbage bins. But each time he compared what he saw to what was written on his report, his frown deepened. After 20 minutes, he snapped his clipboard shut. "Mr. Mitchell, between you and me, none of this holds water. Somebody filed these reports in bulk to weaponize our system against you." "Let me guess," I said. "A woman named Corinne Prescott?" He didn't answer, but the tiny smile tugging at his mouth said enough. "I'll be forwarding this to the district attorney's office," he said. "False code complaints are a misdemeanor, and whoever filed them did so repeatedly. You should start keeping a record of everything. Dates, calls, letters. The county takes this kind of abuse seriously." When he left, I stood in the driveway, watching his taillights fade down Maple Street. My grandfather used to say bullies get meaner when they realize you're not scared anymore. Corinne had moved from fake cops to fake violations in less than a week. She was escalating. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Walker came by carrying a manila envelope like it was evidence. "You should see this," she said. Inside were neatly labeled photos, notes, and letters. Corinne's name was all over them, printed, signed, or stamped. "I've been keeping records," Mrs. Walker said. "I've lived here 30 years, Jake. I know a scam when I see one. She's been targeting the widows first, telling them their homes violate new HOA rules, most just pay to avoid embarrassment." The photos showed Corinne standing on porches with her clipboard, pointing, lecturing. Some neighbors even had signs posted that said "community member in good standing," like badges of obedience. "She's been collecting thousands," Mrs. Walker said. "And the worst part, she's been calling the county pretending to be a registered HOA president. She used the title to file those complaints." I stared at the paper trail, dates, check copies, handwritten notes. It was the kind of record that could ruin her. That night I sat at my desk with the envelope spread out like a crime scene. Each photo told a story, fear in people's eyes, compliance written on checks. I could almost hear my grandfather again. "Write it all down, Jake. Paper remembers what people forget." So I did, every conversation, every timestamp, every false complaint. At 10:42 p.m. my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered anyway. A familiar voice hissed through static. "You should have taken the hint. You're not wanted here." "Corinne," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. "This isn't about you anymore. You're just in the way. Sell the property and this all goes away." There was something in her voice I hadn't heard before, a tremor. Fear, maybe, or desperation. "I'm not selling," I said, "and I'm not backing down." "Then you'll regret it." The line went dead. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch swing against its chains. I stepped out barefoot onto the cold wood and watched the trees shift in the dark. My house, my grandfather's legacy, stood quiet, but it wasn't safe anymore. I looked toward the road. A single car idled at the far end of the street, headlights dimmed. It stayed there for a long moment before driving off into the night. Whatever game Karen was playing, she wasn't playing it alone anymore. I didn't sleep much after that call. Every creak in the house made me flinch. The wind pushed the screen door back and forth with a dull clack-clack that echoed through the kitchen. By sunrise, I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to peel paint, my mind replaying Karen's voice over and over, "You're not wanted here." The line between threat and promise had blurred. By mid-morning, I was too restless to sit still. I drove to the county office, that same manila folder riding shotgun. The clerk behind the counter was a woman named Linda, glasses perched on the edge of her nose, expression like she'd seen it all. "What can I help you with?" she asked. "I need to verify property and HOA records," I said, sliding my ID and a copy of my deed across the counter. "Somebody's claiming authority over land they don't own." She typed for a while, the rhythmic tap of her keyboard filling the silence. "Address: 27 Maple Street." Her screen flickered as she scrolled. Then she looked up, calm but curious. "This property was purchased in 1987 by Robert Mitchell, transferred to Jake Mitchell in 2019, clean title, no covenants, no homeowners association on record for that subdivision." I exhaled slowly. So if someone claims they're the HOA president. She smiled faintly, then they're committing fraud. I hesitated. Would the county have to investigate that? Her tone sharpened. If they're collecting money or filing legal documents under a false organization name, yes, that's a criminal matter. I thanked her and before leaving, asked one last question. "Could you check if anyone's recently tried to register an HOA for Maple Creek?" She typed again, then shook her head. "Nothing filed, but..." She leaned closer. "You're not the first person to ask. 2 months ago, another resident called about the same thing. Older gentleman, said he was being fined for a non-existent landscaping violation." My stomach dropped. "Mr. Henderson." "That's the name," she said. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every turn of the wheel tightened something inside me. Karen's scam wasn't just a neighborhood power trip. It was a business, one built on fear, manipulation, and forged authority. When I pulled into my driveway, Mrs. Walker was waiting on the porch with that calm, knowing expression of hers. "I figured you'd be digging," she said. "I've got something else you'll want to see." She handed me another envelope, thicker than the first. Inside were photos, emails, and something that made my blood run cold, a glossy brochure with my neighborhood printed across the top. Maple Creek Redevelopment Initiative, presented by Consolidated Property Management. Below it were mock-ups of luxury townhomes, widened streets, and a line that read Phase 1 acquisition. Parcels 112 complete. My property was number 13. "They've been holding meetings at the community center downtown," Mrs. Walker said. "Private ones. Karen's been bragging that she's helping them clear the old properties for redevelopment." I didn't believe her until this showed up in my mailbox yesterday. The picture was clear now. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was a pawn. The face of a much larger scheme to push homeowners out, seize land, and flip it for profit. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, I stood by the fence line and looked across the neighborhood. The manicured lawns, the new mailboxes, the identical signage, it all made sense. It wasn't for aesthetics. It was conditioning. They were softening people up for change. Around 7 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled up to my curb. A woman in her 30s stepped out, suit pressed sharp, carrying a leather briefcase. Her heels clicked with the kind of confidence that doesn't come cheap. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, flashing a polite corporate smile. "I'm Amanda Sterling from Consolidated Property Management. I understand there's been some tension regarding the Maple Creek Association. I'd like to offer a solution that benefits everyone." I didn't answer right away. The air between us felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. She opened her briefcase, laying out documents like a magician dealing cards. Our firm represents investors interested in revitalizing this area. We're prepared to offer a generous buyout for your property, well above market value, to avoid further disputes. There it was, the mask behind the mask. Let me guess, I said. Karen works for you. Her smile tightened just enough to betray the truth. Ms. Prescott is one of our local contacts. She may have overstepped her role. I almost laughed. Overstepped. She forged authority, filed false reports, and sent fake cops to my door. Amanda didn't flinch. We can make all that go away. All we need is your signature. I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. You can't buy back integrity, Miss Sterling. Tell your clients the answer's no. Her professional veneer cracked just slightly. Then I hope you understand, Mr. Mitchell, people who resist progress rarely enjoy what follows. She turned, heels striking the pavement like punctuation marks in a threat. As the sedan disappeared into the dark, I felt that familiar calm settle over me again. Karen thought she was the storm, but she just revealed the flood behind her. I woke up to the sound of hammering, not inside the house, out front, the kind of metallic pounding that carries purpose, not maintenance. I threw on a shirt, stepped onto the porch, and froze. Someone had driven a wooden stake into my front yard overnight, with a bright orange sign nailed to it. Condemned, unsafe structure, demolition pending. The county seal was printed at the top, except it wasn't the county seal. It was close, but the lettering was off by a single word. Maple Creek County Authority, a name that didn't even exist. Karen had gone from petty threats to psychological warfare. The street was quiet, too quiet. Curtains shifted in windows. People were watching, but nobody stepped outside. I could feel their silence pressing against my back like heat. Fear had become the HOA's best tool. I yanked the sign out of the ground, splinters biting into my palm, and tossed it into the truck bed. The morning air tasted like sawdust and fury. An hour later, I was at the county building inspector's office with that sign in my hand. The clerk at the counter looked up, startled. "Sir." "This came from my front yard," I said. "You tell me if this is real." He took one look and sighed. "Another one," he muttered. "We've had 3 reports this month, all bogus condemnations. Someone's trying to scare folks into selling." "Can you prove it's fake?" He nodded. "Absolutely. Our department doesn't use this font or this logo or those words. Whoever's doing this printed these at home." It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Knowing it was fake didn't make the fear any less real. Fear doesn't need proof. It just needs witnesses. By noon, I was installing cameras on the porch and the fence line. Each click of the drill echoed against the empty street. The breeze carried faint whispers from open windows, neighbors gossiping, pretending they were. That night, I stayed up watching the live feed on my laptop. The glow from the monitor painted the room pale blue. Every few minutes, headlights passed by slowly, pausing just a second too long near my gate. Around 2 a.m., one car stopped. The engine idled. A silhouette stepped out, slender, female, hair tied tight. Karen. She walked up to the mailbox, something glinting in her hand. Then she leaned down, slid an envelope inside, and vanished into the dark. I waited until her car disappeared, then walked out barefoot, the gravel biting into my soles. The envelope had no stamp, just my name in block letters, Jake Mitchell. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Last warning, you're playing with people who don't lose." The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and at the bottom a signature, A.S. Amanda Sterling. I felt a cold wave roll through my chest. The corporate mask was gone. This was a message from the people pulling her strings. I knew then that this wasn't about a neighborhood anymore. It was about land value, leverage, and intimidation disguised as bureaucracy, and I wasn't the first target. The next morning, I went to see Mr. Henderson again. His front lawn was torn up, mailbox gone, porch steps smashed. He opened the door with a limp, his face pale. "They came last night," he whispered. "Said it was for inspection, but they weren't from the county." "Did you call the police?" He shook his head. Didn't bother. They said the HOA authorized it, and everyone believes her, Jake. She's got them scared half to death. I looked around. Every driveway had matching signs now, Maple Creek Maintenance Zone. Bright, professional-looking, just official enough to fool anyone driving through. It hit me how deep the manipulation ran. They weren't just threatening us. They were rewriting reality one sign at a time. That evening, Mrs. Walker stopped by again. "You can't fight them alone," she said. "They've got money, lawyers, and friends in City Hall." "Maybe," I said, "but they don't have truth." She stared at me for a long moment. "Then you better find a way to make truth louder than fear." That sentence stuck with me all night. Around midnight, I uploaded all my evidence, the fake sign, the recorded footage, Corinne's forged documents, Amanda's letter, and sent it anonymously to the county DA's office and a local reporter I knew from years back. The email subject line was simple: "Fraudulent HOA targeting Maple Creek residents, proof attached." When I finally closed my laptop, exhaustion hit like a wave. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the old photos of my grandfather on the wall. His eyes looked steady, calm, like they'd seen worse storms and survived. "I'm not letting them bury this place," I whispered. "Not while I'm breathing." The house creaked softly, as if answering back. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills. A storm was coming, and this time it wasn't just in the sky. By morning, the storm had arrived. Rain pounded the tin gutters, rattling the porch roof like a war drum. I hadn't slept. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, the cursor blinking at the end of that email I'd sent hours earlier, the one that could change everything or nothing at all. Around 8 a.m., I heard the first knock, heavy, deliberate. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw two men in suits standing by the porch. Not police, not inspectors of private security. Their jackets were soaked, but their expressions were bone-dry serious. One held an envelope in a waterproof folder. The other scanned the yard like he was memorizing it. When I opened the door, the shorter one spoke first. "Mr. Mitchell, we're here on behalf of Consolidated Property Management." I almost laughed. "You folks ever get tired of knocking on my door?" He didn't blink. "You've been served, cease and desist order." He handed me the papers, thick, legal, all jargon. I skimmed the first line and saw the claim: defamation and obstruction of corporate redevelopment efforts. They were suing me for telling the truth. I leaned against the doorframe, rain dripping from my hair. "Tell Amanda she'll need a better lawyer and a conscience." The taller guard smirked. "You really don't get it, do you? We always win." I didn't bother replying, just shut the door slow enough for them to hear it latch. Inside, I tore open the envelope and spread the papers across the counter. Every accusation was twisted: false statements, interference, harassment. But they'd left fingerprints all over their arrogance. Attached to the filing were exhibits, fake HOA documents, property resolutions, and maps showing the planned demolition zone. They'd submitted their own crime as evidence. As I stared at the papers, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Nice email, hero. Shame if your little video clips disappeared." A chill crawled up my spine. I sprinted to the living room. The laptop screen was black, files gone, every folder empty. "They hacked me." I slammed my fist against the desk. Damn it. That's when the power went out. The lights died. The house fell into silence, except for the rain drumming against the windows. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the dark, breathing hard. Then I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on, and checked the breaker box. All fine. Someone had cut the power from outside. I stepped out into the storm. Mud soaked my jeans instantly. The air smelled like ozone and wet earth. I followed the line of my fence until I found it, the junction box ripped open, wires hanging. Footprints in the mud led back toward the road. They wanted to shake me, maybe even scare me into leaving before the story went public. Instead, it lit a fuse inside me. I drove straight into town, windshield wipers barely keeping up. By the time I reached the Maple Creek Chronicle office, I was dripping rainwater and fury. The receptionist blinked up at me. "Can I help you?" Yeah, I said. Tell your editor the Maple Creek HOA scam isn't a rumor anymore. 10 minutes later, I was in a cluttered office facing a woman with sharp eyes and a half-empty mug of coffee. You got proof? She asked. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, my backup, the one they didn't know about. Enough to burn their whole operation down. Her expression didn't change, but her voice did. Then let's make them famous. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The fake signs, the letters, the photos of Karen posing as president, the financial trails leading straight to Consolidated. She took notes fast, the kind of fast that means adrenaline and truth are finally shaking hands. When I walked out of that office, the storm had eased. The clouds were thinning, sunlight slicing through in fragile golden beams. I hadn't realized how tense my shoulders were until that moment, when the first bit of light hit my hands and I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I could breathe. But it didn't last long. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw them again, 2 black SUVs parked down the street, engines idling. Watching. And on my porch rail, a new note taped under a plastic sleeve. We warned you, this is your final notice. No signature this time, just a small printed logo in the corner. The same one from Amanda's glossy redevelopment brochure. I looked out across the darkening street, every house silent behind drawn curtains. The neighborhood that used to feel like home now looked like a stage set for something rotten. I realized then this wouldn't end quietly, not anymore. They'd spent months building their illusion. Now I was going to tear it down, piece by piece. The morning the handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, the world felt both unbearably loud and painfully ordinary. Rain had started again, soft this time, like a blanket being laid over the wreckage, and neighbors had gathered on porches in bathrobes and work shirts, faces raw with a mixture of relief and something like shame. I watched her go to the squad car and thought of all the afternoons my grandfather spent teaching me how to prune roses so they'd come back stronger. I thought about how easy it is for people to forget what they've been given until someone tries to take it away. Detective Harris's voice was steady as she read Karen her rights. The excavator sat idle in the yard, tracks frozen in the mud, a mechanical wound across my grandfather's roses. Tommy Rodriguez, the operator, gave a statement that later became evidence. He'd been told the job was authorized, paid in cash, and given forged permits. It was messy, and it was honest testimony. That mattered. The DA moved quickly. The paperwork Mrs. Walker had kept, receipts, timelines, photographs, became a ledger of truth in a courtroom. The prosecutor called witnesses who had paid fees to the Maple Creek Community Authority and the older residents who'd been humiliated into compliance. Mrs. Walker went on the stand and told the story the way she'd watched it unfold, choosing clarity over vengeance. Her voice, when it trembled, did so because of the hurt she'd felt watching neighbors exploited. When she finished, the murmur in the courtroom was like the intake of a neighborhood breathing together for the first time in months. But the real turn came from a stack of documents we didn't know existed until the FBI pulled them from a secured server. Emails, wire transfers, meeting notes that linked a property management firm to a network of local officials and contractors. Agent Walsh came to my porch one evening with a folder of photos and a look that said things were worse, and better, than we thought. Worse because the scheme reached further than Maple Creek, better because federal resources meant they could follow the money. Marcus Vyulov, the man the photos had shown lurking in the shadows, became a name with a face, then a face with a warrant. Within weeks, arrests spread beyond Karen to the people who'd hidden behind her theatrics. A middle manager at Consolidated, a county employee who'd signed off on forms that never should have existed, and a contractor who'd laundered payments through shell companies. Court dates stacked up like shingles in a storm. Consolidated's lawyers tried to distance their client from Karen's little theater, but the paper trail had a stubborn, plain-spoken clarity. Amanda Sterling's polished confidence cracked in cross-examination when her email chain surfaced, one that suggested knowledge of the fake condemnations and a phone call she'd made to a developer insisting the project would move forward regardless. The judge frowned at that one. In the end, settlements were reached, restitution ordered, and plea bargains secured for some. Karen's sentence was the most visible: multiple counts, fraud, conspiracy, and criminal property destruction, carrying years of consequences. It didn't bring the roses back overnight, but it held a measure of accountability. What surprised me most was how quickly the neighborhood shifted. People who'd watched from behind curtains began to step forward. Some who'd paid out of fear came to the DA's office to change their statements. Frank Morrison organized a cleanup. Tommy Rodriguez showed up with his own shovel, embarrassed and apologetic and honest. On a Saturday morning lined in cold sunlight, a dozen neighbors showed up with wheelbarrows and work gloves. We scribed new posts for mailboxes and replanted the roses my grandfather had loved. Mrs. Walker brewed coffee in a thermos and handed out paper cups like a small blessing. There were quieter reckonings too. Some friendships couldn't be repaired, people had been manipulated or had made choices they weren't proud of. But community is not the absence of conflict. It's what you build after the damage has been measured and the bruise has been tended. I found myself talking to neighbors I'd only ever waved to before. We compared notes and laughed, bitter at first, then softer, over the absurdity that had swallowed our street. The sameness that Karen had manufactured was gone. Mailboxes became hand-painted again. Garden lights returned to irregular placement. The charm came back because people chose it. Agent Walsh recommended I seriously consider relocation. The men who'd funded the operation didn't like losing money. The FBI offered options, protection, temporary relocation, a change of identity if I wanted it. I sat on the back steps where my grandfather once told me to check the level twice and always trust the plumb line, and I weighed it like a man choosing between two heavy tools. Leaving would have been practical. Staying felt like refusing to give a victory to those who'd tried to buy or burn us out. In the end, I declined the safe house. I told Agent Walsh I'd take extra precautions, and I meant it. Cameras, better locks, community watch schedules. But I would not let fear be the final arbiter of whether this land stayed in our family. The trial was messy, human, and ultimately clear enough. In court, the ledger of lies unraveled and the restitution checks were signed. Karen's sentence included restitution payments to victims and mandated counseling. Small remedies, perhaps, compared to the time and trust she'd stolen, but not nothing. Consolidated faced heavy fines and the loss of several municipal contracts. Marcus Vulov and his associates were indicted on charges that reached past Maple Creek into other towns. The ripple effect mattered. What had been done here couldn't be easily replicated elsewhere. Months later, when the roses were replanted and a new walkway replaced the old one, Mrs. Walker and I stood on the porch watching children chase a dog down the block. The neighborhood had scars, and so did I, but there was also laughter. Real, unforced laughter, swinging over the fence like wind chimes. I thought about my grandfather's quiet way of measuring things, and about how dignity sometimes looks like doing the small, stubborn work of repair. I learned that courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's filing the right form. Sometimes it's making one phone call that exposes a pattern. Sometimes it's sitting on a porch in the dark and refusing to be intimidated into leaving. Most of all, I learned that communities are fragile but not irredeemable if people are willing to be honest with one another and to hold the record of what happened in their hands. When I walk the yard now, the soil still holds the memory of the trench, but it also holds seeds. Mrs. Walker likes to point out how the roses are taking root better than last year, and I let her. I let the small pleasures back into the days. The creak of the gate that used to bother me now sounds like the house settling, not someone scheming. The phone sometimes rings with a reporter checking in or with a neighbor asking if I can help fix a broken step. I answer both. The last time I saw Karen, she was led from the courtroom in a gray jumpsuit, hands empty of folders and unable to hide anything behind a smile. There was sorrow there, not for her victim so much as for the person she could have been had she chosen differently. I felt no glee. Justice, when it comes, is rarely a cinematic triumph. It's paperwork, testimony, and neighbors bringing coffee to the people who sat up late keeping the story alive. Standing on the porch with soil under my nails and a thermos of coffee in my hand, I felt my grandfather beside me in the ordinary, exact way he'd always been there, steady, practical, unshowy. He would have told me to document everything, plant deeper, and remember that land is less about ownership and more about stewardship. Maybe that's the hardest lesson I learned. Ownership is a title, but stewardship is a promise, and I intend to keep it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.